There's a quote from H.P. Lovecraft that says, "The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown." And that's a fear that is not only omnipresent in Lovecraft's tales of mind-bending otherworldly horror, but throughout horror in general. There's something in our lizard brains that can't help but look into the dark and imagine our worst fears come to life. But there's another type of horror that's quite the opposite. That of the fear of the very well-known. A fear of the scientific, the definable, the natural. A fear at the center of the creature feature. In animal horror cinema, genre history, and criticism, Katarina Gregersdottir describes the subgenre as movies where the animal seeks to challenge the predominance of the human through physical, sometimes consumptive, violence. In this way, it is the dangerous and transgressive animal that elicits suspense and fear in animal horror cinema. Also known as natural horror, there's a fine but distinct line between the creature feature and the monster movie. The classic creature feature centers on a product of nature, something driven by pure impulse and representing part of the world humans can't inherently control. The animal terrorizing our survivors has no greater drive than to simply feed its instincts and, as such, usually lacks sympathy, but is also inherently anthropomorphized in its symbolism. The monster movie focuses on something unnatural, either created by man or the supernatural, and often plays as an allegory for real-world societal issues. On one side you have the great white shark from Jaws, and on the other you have the xenomorph from Alien. There is, of course, a blurring gray between the two, a shifting between natural creature and sci-fi monster that helps creators of all decades speak to their present times. And as man-made disasters and fears of global annihilation have increased over the decades, we can see the creature feature shift from being a reminder of our small place in the world to being a story of man reaping what he's sown. By exploring the classic creature feature and its many iterations, we can see why nature, in all its uncontrollable, ancient yet extremely present ways, may be the most timeless horror of all. Horror movies consist of many different subgenres, and while no movie needs to stick to any single convention to be effective in its narrative, the nature of pitching to movie studios and appealing to audiences causes most movies to fall into specific genre trappings for easy definition and marketing. Natural horror has its own continuum of subgenre, slowly moving from creature feature to giant animal to monster movie. While we'll largely stay on the creature feature and giant animal side of the spectrum, it's fascinating to see how these elements blur over time, each propelled by landmark movies in their subgenres. The very first of these can be seen in Harry Ohoyt's 1925 adaptation of Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World, but the great tension between man and animal can be tracked back even further to Charles Darwin's On the Origin of the Species, published in 1859. Darwin's theory of evolution caused major public uproar due to its scientific linking of man and ape, standing in stark contrast to creationism's divide between man and animal. Accompanying Darwin's controversy was French sculptor Emmanuel Frimet's Gorille en Levant in 1859, which caused massive scandal due to its connection to Darwin's work, making the physical and even sexual connection of man and beast more explicit at the time. The tension of man's biological link to animal has been a core tenet of horror ever since. The Lost World story of a group of explorers finding dinosaurs in Peru is pure fantasy, but it acts as a sort of bridge between the crude natural history films, if that's what you can call Teddy Roosevelt slaughtering dozens of endangered species, that grew in popularity in the early 1900s, and the modern age of creature feature. The same can be said for Cooper and Schoedsack's King Kong in 1933, which has its crew travel to Skull Island in search of a beast that will bring them fame and fortune. Like The Lost World, Kong is all about modern man stumbling onto mythic nature run rampant, and that nature's inherent incompatibility with the modern world. When the two collide, nature is inevitably destroyed, giving Kong and Andero a sort of doomed relationship. We can see Kong as the first majorly popular creature feature and a reflection of its time, drawing a hard and fast line between modernity and questionable savagery. But we can see as time went on that the triumph of modern man over nature became less and less guaranteed on film. The core tenet of creature features is that humankind believes itself to be the opposite of animal. Our ability to speak and invent has given us the capacity to subjugate animals and assert our version of society over the wild, which is why the sudden threat that arises in these films upends our socially constructed sense of safety. To be confronted with the idea of being a lower link in the food chain, someone whose carefully curated body and mind are used for a forgettable meal, is inherently terrifying. Creature features commonly focus on humankind coming into contact with wild animals that represent nature on the borders of society. Push too far into nature and you'll find yourself face to face with a grizzly bear, or an anaconda, or an alligator, or a grizzly bear, or a gorilla, or a grizzly bear. Seriously, there's a lot of grizzly movies. In these more realistic, at least on a scale of realism, horror movies, there are only two outcomes in the battle between society and the animals that have encroached upon it. Either man defeats the animal, seemingly punishing a wild beast for its strangely purposeful transgression of societal norms, or the animal defeats man, permanently breaking down the laws of society. That latter possibility was seen in many 50s creature features, blending atomic fears with giant beasts, often insects, who threatened society in ways that made the atomic bomb easier to swallow. Many of these films are centered on animals invading the newly forming suburbs, disrupting the tenuous American dream after World War II. But there's another type of creature horror, that of the wild suddenly asserting itself in the midst of society. That's seen in Stephen King's Cujo, where a beloved dog goes on a rampage from rabies, or Jaws, where a man-eater plants itself off the coast of Amity Island, disrupting the small town and its capitalistic need for summer tourists. There's perhaps no better example of animals' sudden, coordinated power disrupting society completely than Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, whose debut in 1963 marked the popular formation of natural horror in modern film. While The Birds hasn't aged all that well compared to much of Hitchcock's filmography, its inherent horror, drawn from author Daphne du Maurier's short story, taps into the inherent fear that nature could suddenly, decisively change in ways society can't handle. In this case, it's every bird suddenly becoming aggressive to humans with no explanation and no resolution. The ending is bleak, with the survivors driving away, surrounded by thousands of birds simply watching them. It may be corny, but it's unsettling in its notion. Nature is greater than you will ever be. In the wake of The Birds came a new wave of creature feature focused on swarming animals that could disrupt society as a whole. Ants, bats, giant rabbits, dogs gone mad. Bees definitely had a moment in the 70s. The public's slowly growing obsession with dangerous animals led to another landmark, Jaws, which was inspired by a then recent string of publicized shark attacks. The impact of Jaws' debut in 1975 can't be understated. Not only did Spielberg's adaptation of the smash hit Peter Benchley novel begin the age of the blockbuster, it kicked off a massive wave of imitators looking to bottle some of Jaws' lightning, just with a much cheaper budget and less talented crew. To list just a few movies that could be best described as "it's like Jaws, but," there's Orca, Tintorera, Tentacles, and The Deep in 1977, Barracuda and Piranha in 1978, Alligator in 1980, Great White in 1981, Anaconda in 1997, and Deep Blue Sea and Lake Placid in 1999. Those are just the water-based ripoffs. Jaws was the second modern boom of the creature feature in film, with all manner of giant animal movies working off its success to get audiences in theaters. And don't forget the increasingly wretched series of Jaws sequels. Grizzly in 1976 is the first to really play off the Jaws on land concept, reiterating the idea of one giant abnormality completely disrupting and killing the men and women who think they understand nature.
The most massive, foul-tempered, dangerous flesh-eater of all. Grizzly.
But Jaws is more than just a shaper of film trends. The public reaction to Spielberg's film encapsulates what is often the most negative repercussion of portraying animals as purposefully homicidal killing machines. Jaws is the turning point in public perception of sharks, most specifically the endangered great white. By showing animals critical to the ecosystem as dangers to humans, real-life humankind grows indifferent or even malicious to animals. I can guarantee you that no matter how popular the film may be, and Jaws is one of my personal favorites, no shark has ever seen it. No shark has the ability to speak for themselves and explain the realities of their existence. No matter how many films may claim that no animals were harmed in the making of this movie.
Steiner, you son of a...
Using real-life animals as metaphors for human fears means that many more animals were harmed outside the film due to their portrayal. Of course, just because a horror movie roots its fears in nature doesn't mean that it has to be realistic or all that scientific. Just look at M. Night Shyamalan's The Happening, a movie where plant spores make you kill yourself. The concept, nature is fed up with humanity's pollution and fights back, is definitely natural horror through and through. It's just dumb as dog shit. Not every animal attack movie is centered on a predator suddenly putting its crosshairs on humans. Some, like Willard and Monkey Shines, show that human interference with natural life sours and changes the creature of their particular feature. If people had simply let animals be animals, the situation would never have happened. Steven Spielberg and Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park is a fascinating example of using the creature feature to interrogate humanity's scientific hubris. The dinosaurs themselves are ancient nature, but being brought into contact with humans is guaranteed disaster. While Jurassic Park has the hallmarks of a straight monster movie due to the foreign nature of its creatures, its conflict comes first and foremost from nature run amok. This is the story of humanity reasserting nature while thinking they hold all the keys. But in the end,
life, finds a way.
And the only way to survive is to flee. It's a fine line walked in the original book and film, but like any franchise draining its central concept for cash, that line is eventually walked all over, culminating in Jurassic World, which is most certainly a monster movie with its genetically modified super predator Indominus Rex having all the hallmarks of a slasher killer, like a 30-foot tall Jason Voorhees on the loose in Disneyland. That's actually a great idea, someone do that. Your mileage may vary with World's concept, but it should be seen first and foremost as a monster movie and not a natural horror film. Even then, the blend of monster and pressing ecological issue finds its epitome in another massive lizard. It's difficult to talk about creature features without discussing Ishiro Honda's seminal 1954 film Godzilla. While the King of the Monsters is most emblematic of the kaiju subgenre, where all manner of skyscraper-sized monsters do battle over the fate of the world, the original Godzilla has much more in common with classic creature and disaster movies than its battle royale franchise descendants. You probably know the story already. Honda made his film in the wake of the United States bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki during World War II, and Godzilla himself is a direct representation of the nation's fears of nuclear holocaust. Here, Godzilla's rise is caused by testing hydrogen bombs in the ocean, and the monster's path through Japan, full of building-destroying mayhem and burning radiation fury, is the man-made terror of the atomic bomb given form. In the wake of World War II, the idea of a man-made apocalypse seemed more real than ever. What real-world animal could compare? While Godzilla would soon turn into a family-friendly protector of Japan, the monster would return to his modern disaster ways every so often, most notably in 1984's The Return of Godzilla and 2016's Shin Godzilla. Godzilla is often connected to King Kong, made even more apparent by the push to have the two giant animals battle each other, but they symbolize very different ideas. If Kong is the natural disaster that comes when man pushes too far into nature and egotistically believes they can control it, then Godzilla is nature's punishment that man reaps when creating powers they were never meant to have. In this way, Godzilla also links the monster movie to its brethren in disaster movies and apocalypse films, both also rooted in nature upending the safety created by society. Our beds, our homes, our walls, our daily routine suddenly mean nothing when the walls come crashing down, either due to a massive earthquake or a massive foot. The modern creature feature has split off into many different directions thanks to the often low budgetary needs of such horror movies. There's a massive amount of Z-grade trash like Birdemic or Sharknado, versus the intense claustrophobic horror of Crawl. But in general, the genre of small-scale, realism-adjacent creature features has receded in favor of films depicting global catastrophes or societal horrors. It seems as if, as we remove ourselves further and further from nature, the more terrifying our own destructive capabilities have become. Because the animal in us seems further away, the human horrors we create seem closer than ever. Maybe, in the light of global warming and pollution, we've become scarier than the animals that once frightened us. Maybe it's because, to quote astrophysicist Hubert Reeves, man is the most insane species. He worships an invisible god and destroys a visible nature, unaware that this nature he's destroying is this god he's worshipping. Maybe it's because nature will always have its place in our world, and the further we damage and corrupt it, the more it asserts itself, reminding us that no matter what we do or how far we advance, nature will be here long after we're gone. Hello and thanks for watching today's video. This is the third part of my annual Halloween series and I hope that you're enjoying it so far. This one is a little bit out of the ordinary and a little bit broader in focus than my typical video, but I thought that this would make a really interesting subject. I'd been thinking about creature features and monster movies for a long time and I realized that now was the perfect opportunity to really address the subject. There's a lot of great creature feature movies, there's a lot of bad creature feature movies, and there's a lot of movies that just fill up the corners of online streaming services that you've never heard of. But I think it's a really fascinating subject, especially in how it's been applied in so many different ways in film over the years. Some of my favorite movies are animal-centered horror films like Jaws and King Kong. And while it's a really big and broad subject, I thought that diving into it and exploring the different facets of it would make for an interesting video. So I hope that you enjoyed that exploration. As always, thank you to my patrons for continuing to support me, and if you'd like to support me and get early access to videos and exclusive content, it's only $1 a month on Patreon. I'll be back again soon with another entry in this Halloween series. I hope that you're doing well, staying safe, getting into the Halloween season, and having some fun. See you soon.